Hello and welcome. It is Thursday evening again. You are watching AIL TV. I'm Joseph Otieno Adamson. As always, every Thursdays we have got captivating discussions. And this evening, David Otto from Stepped In, Step Out, in short we call it CISO. He has got special guest, but we have got also our regular guest here. He will tell you all about it. So, David, you are on.
Uh, Thank you very much, Mr. Joseph Otieno. I really want to appreciate once more the platform that has been given to us by Africans in London TV for us to continue to present, Africa's own story, especially when it comes to issues of security, which is, in my opinion, some people might have a contrary view. In my opinion, security is the bedrock of every country. And that is one of the key reasons why we have taken upon our time to have these conversations, to create some awareness, but also to learn, especially from the highly knowledgeable guests that, devote their time to come to this program and speak to our audience. So we really want to appreciate again. We're not forgetting our audience that has always been there. Specifically, we really appreciate all those who continue to send their questions over, so we can put those questions to a very knowledgeable audience. Sorry, to a knowledgeable guest and panelists that we have here all the time. So we thank you again, and continue to send these questions and your suggestions as to the areas where you want us to focus on, and we will do that. So today is the 1st of October, and as an African, and as many of you know, it's a very significant date in the history of a number of African countries. When I travel around, people always speak to me about Nigeria being the elephant of Africa, and that is because some people say 2 in 10 black people in the universe come from Nigeria. It's the most populous nation in the world, in a black African nation, and that means the independence of Nigeria and other African countries have a very significant impact to the liberation of the continent. Now, I don't know if I'm going to call that liberation. I don't know if my guests, when they come on, they would agree with me that Africa has been liberated, but, we'll get to that point. So again, I thought maybe today, from the request that our guests have made, we should talk a lot more about this liberation of Africa, or the independence of African states. Someone reminded me that, in 1884, 1885, the Berlin Conference, held independently of any African contribution, and made a decision that, they were going to divide African countries like a piece of cake. And basically, this was for, principally the interest and all the interest of these Western powers. They call themselves the Allies at the time, or the Axis, or whatever, they decided to call themselves at the time. The Berlin Conference was very significant because it presented a platform that officially, gave, spheres of influence to European states on African soil and on African countries. And as you can see today, some of you can look at the maps of Africa. You realize that some of the maps are drawn in straight line. Other areas of the maps, they call them boundaries, but they don't exist, practically. And that is the legacy of the Berlin Conference, because in that conference, Africa was chopped in several pieces and, distributed to the people that were present there for them to control it. And of course, that has left a legacy where 60 years or plus or minus, we are talking about celebration of the independence of Africa. So I really don't know whether we should be celebrating or whether we should be mourning. And I think my guest will talk about that. But that brings me into the security aspect of this. And this is where countries like Cameroon come in. Because as my guest would dive into much more, Cameroon is a particular country that suffered, I want to use that word precisely, from various colonial influence. You had the Portuguese, who, by my understanding, gave the name Cameroon, which is Rio dos Cameros, the river of prawns. They had an impact in Cameroon. And then, of course, you had the Germans, who colonized the areas in Cameroon, the coastal regions of Douala and some of the hinterlands. Of course, we know the history of how the First World War came about and went away. You have the mandates by the League of Nations, after the Versailles Treaty, where a country like Cameroon was divided into, literally into two parts. The bigger parts of it, which is currently La République du Cameroun, was, allocated nicely to the French. The smaller part, which, was given the name at the time, Cameroon, was, given to conveniently to the British, who at the time, were, principally operating in Nigeria. So you had West Cameroon, but significantly, West Cameroon was then divided by the British. The British say they did that for administrative convenience, and West Cameroon became British Northern Cameroon and British Southern Cameroon. Of course, the administration of those two territories were then attributed, or maybe linked, is the best to use, with the administration of Cameroon in Nigeria. I think I quite remember very well. I don't know if it's at the House of Enugu or something like that, but my colleagues here would have something to talk about that if we get to that point. Now, significantly about that is the fact that we now have a scenario in the 50s, or the 1950s to be precise, where this territory, British West Cameroon, was then given the choice of a referendum, or what they call at the time the plebiscite, the British Northern Cameroon. Of course, remember that there was a test referendum or plebiscite in 1958, where the British Northern Cameroon were asked whether they wanted to join, at the time, Nigeria, which was, of course, administered by the British, or whether they wanted to join their brothers. And I'm talking about their brothers here, referring to British Southern Cameroon. And significantly, they had opted to join, to actually have a later decision, because the option of independence was not in that plebiscite question. So, but again, fast forward to 1961, where you had the, I don't know if 1960, I think, I'm confusing those dates a little bit, but you then had the independence, the plebiscite question, which was given whether the British Northern Cameroon and the British Southern Cameroon wanted to join Nigeria or La République du Cameroun. And in the ensuing votes, we know that the British Southern Cameroon voted to join La République as a federal state. British Northern Cameroon decided to join Nigeria. There's been a lot of controversy about that decision, why the British had to not consider British Southern Cameroon and British Northern Cameroon as West Cameroon, rather than dividing them to have separate referendums. So, there's that question about that, which I think plays in the current dynamics. I mean, the reason why I bring this out, and I'm going to talk to now, is because if you don't understand history, it's very difficult for you to be able to appreciate current events. But also, as one of my panelists said to me today, it's also very difficult for you to progress in a way that you would address the underlying issues. So today we have a conflict in the former British Southern Cameroon, which is the Northwest and the Southwest regions. current day system. There's a separatist movement which has been ongoing violently for the past 3 years, and they are saying that they want to have their independence. And because today is the 1st of October, I want to first of all introduce my guest, and we would move from there. I have with me today somebody who has a very deep knowledge of this subject matter, and he's a retired colonel of the Cameroon Armed Forces. He's worked in several Western countries, and he's also a medical doctor. Colonel retired Aloysius Mbaka. Thank you for coming. I would also introduce to you a certified anti-terrorism specialist, somebody who understands the nature of the conflict, understands the region, and has been talking about the way forward and critically analyzing the situation in Cameroon. So, Colonel Mbaka, let me start with you because, of course, you've got more experience than 5 of me put together. Maybe 10. Should we be celebrating the 1st of October? And what is the significance of that? Because as I understand, there are some quarters that believe the 1st of October should be celebrated in Cameroon, not kind of buried in the annals of history. Do you agree with that?
Thank you very much, David, for having me. Thank you for bringing me back to this panel. I'm really quite. The question about the importance of dates in history, especially for the Cameroon, is significant because it tells the history. The dates, this particular date is very important because the reunification or the unification, as some people would want to call it, of French and British Southern Cameroons, it was really like an experiment. There is none other that has happened of people coming from very different origins in terms of their inheritance, colonial inheritance, and coming together to create one country. So this is a very important decision, a very important milestone in the history of Cameroon, and therefore should be celebrated. I want to say that these two events took place on the same date. So there is a type of confusion about the dates, and the independence of Southern Cameroon was on that day, and also the reunification of Southern Cameroons with the Republic of Cameroon was on that day. So two significant events on one day. And I think that it's not anything that can be buried under the underneath. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for making that clarification. Now let me go to Sally Nana, because you've been following this the events that are happening in Cameroon, but also we've talked about the independence of African states. Do you think that this is the first of October, especially in the context of Cameroon, and also in the context of Nigeria? Should we be celebrating our independence, or should we be mourning, or is there a third option that you see?
Thank you very much, David, for having me, and good evening to our viewers, and also to Colonel Mbaka. No, I think independence is very important, and it's important to celebrate because colonialism was a very horrific system, very racist, exploitative, and dehumanizing system. So it was quite important morally, physically, economically, politically for African countries to gain their independence. Also, a lot of our forefathers died in this process, either trying to get the independence in one way or the other, campaign for it and sacrifice for it in one way or the other. So we cannot just say that was not important. So that is something to commemorate, to remember. So in terms of Nigeria, I think that Nigerians are celebrating independence not because they don't have problems, but they are celebrating independence to say 60 years after we got this independence, we are still together. It's 350 ethnic groups plus, is 200 million people plus, much more complicated than when they had independence in terms of the issues and the population. So should we be celebrating? Yes, absolutely. And I think what I find rather controversial is for Ambazonia separatists to celebrate independence on 1st of October. Because as the colonel said, what happened on this day in 1961 was the plebiscite and the reunification. So like, I think people who should be celebrating are the ones who are on the side of federalism and who wants to restore, because the independence that is being described in 1961 for Southern Cameroons was an independence to a federation. So it was not an independence to create a state, a separate state that Ambazonia is looking for. As the colonel earlier said in our earlier discussions, Ambazonia was created in 1984 by Goj Dinka, and it's a different country and it's a different state. And it does not actually, it's not a match for Southern Cameroons. There is an attempt to say that, okay, David is Colonel Mbaka and Colonel Mbaka is David, but I don't think the two people, they might be similar and they might come from the same place in Cameroon, but they are two different people. So I think that the independence that could be celebrated, the Southern Cameroonians could celebrate if, or commemorate, or rather remember this date to commemorate the achievement of a semi-autonomous country that is a federal state. But for Ambazonians, that is not an achievement because they don't want to, they are very hostile to who the people they call the federalists. So Nigeria is right to celebrate. I don't know if Ambazonia is right to celebrate. People who are supporting a return to the 1961, to the status quo, to pre-1972 can actually celebrate, and or in order to remind people that, okay, this is what it used to be. We used to be a separate federal autonomous West Cameroon, and now we are part of a centralized La République du Cameroon. So I think that celebrating can be described in many ways. Like, what are we actually celebrating? Like in Nigeria, some people might be saying there's a lot of poverty, there is a lot of fighting, there are a lot of people being killed, there is insecurity. What are we celebrating? But we are celebrating a lot of things, including the founding fathers, including the people that sacrifice a lot in time, in efforts, in money, being locked up, being killed in order to end colonization, which was a brutal system imposed on Africans by white colonialists.
Yeah, let me get to you on that point, and I'm sure that Dr. Mbaka is also going to contribute on this. Now, when you look at, I'm a fan of history, and I dive into history very much often. When you look at the legacy of the colonial masters, to use that word finally for, perhaps for their benefit. When you look at the legacy which has been left after Berlin, where African countries, have been, they were, again, as I mentioned, they were divided amongst spheres of influence without any consideration of, bloodline, whether you had relatives in Cameroon or in Nigeria. It was done for their benefit. Now, the impact, as you've mentioned, people were killed, resources looted, atrocities committed, human rights abuse in huge numbers. Now, for me, I mean, this is my perspective, and I want to hear your perspective. I know you've said something of that nature. I think the African Union should be saying to African countries that your independence should be a day of mourning. It should be a day of reflection, a day that African countries should sit down and try and see how they can reverse some of the legacies that were left as a result of the colonial impact in the continent. It shouldn't be a day when people should be going to the streets and drinking and merrymaking and marching from one area to another. Do you think that if we look at that perspective, it may have an impact in the way that our current generation and our future generation views this whole issue of independence?
I think that people, you are right to some extent, and people do have that perspective that there's nothing to celebrate, we need to mourn. But I think that mourning is quite extreme. I would say it should be a day of reflection. I would say that we cannot be a continent that does not respect the memories of the dead. We cannot dismiss the sacrifices of the people that actually got us the independence, whichever way they did it. But whether we have felt post-independent and the fact that the African state has become, most of the African states have become failed states as a result of neo-colonial policies of the West, like France-Afrique, for example, and also the fact that most of our politicians are just ranch managers for Western neo-colonial interests. And also that has happened, but I think that what that calls for is more in-depth reflection. So the African Union should organize a more in-depth reflection and also come out with proposals on how to address these issues, because it's not enough to be crying about them.
Okay, it's not enough.
We need like to say, okay, the African Union need to say, okay, this is what we need to do about it. But I think you are right to some extent. It should be a day of celebration that these people contributed to free us. We are free people. We are no longer colonized, and at the same time, we have a lot of issues we should reflect on how we can resolve them. And one of the ways to resolve them is to actually reject neo-colonialism.
Okay, that's a good point. Yes, yeah. Colonel Mbaka, before we witness the penetration of the colonial legacy, we were free before, and now we are celebrating a freedom in between. The colonial legacy. Should we be, celebrating, or should we be reflecting, or should we be mourning?
I think it's a mixture. I have the sentiment of a mixture of all these, because really the fact is that we have come through a period of subjugation. As you did mention, we've been divided up and with an objective of exploiting the people of Africa. We've been enslaved, which was a major, had a major impact on communities in Africa in terms of their culture, in terms of their economy, and so on. Following that, the West decided to implant itself to really make Africa its farm where it could harvest. So it implanted a lot of institutions that including our education, So I would say that we have some reasons to celebrate. We have had some milestones, important milestones. Many more countries, of course, the whole of Africa is independent at the moment. Africa was more divided at independence than it is at the moment. We freed parts of Africa that were still subjugated to the rule of the colonialism, and apartheid, like South Africa, and so on. I think those are some of the factors that can make us say we can celebrate. And of course, we have not all followed the same path. Some countries are more successful than others, and therefore that is something we can celebrate if it's a contribution by those countries to make other countries come up. But I think, as Dr. Nana said, it's a time for reflection, to realign ourselves, to say what are the objectives here. You can see that from the beginning, we didn't have the same objectives. We were divided. We were infiltrated. We had, as I said before, in the conversation before that, we had these two groups of people, two camps, which were kind of divided. The Monrovia and the Casablanca groups, which had different objectives as regards the independences, and the French, the Casablanca group, which was influenced by the French community in Africa, which is another form of colonialism. In fact, before Dr. Nkrumah coined that word, neo-colonialism, it had already started with the French community in Africa, which had ascendancy on the economy, on the political lives of the community, and also the currency of the people. So that was a different direction altogether from the Monrovia group, which wanted its independence and advocated the unity of Africa, which was regarded and has still been regarded as too radical. Yes. Another thing is that at least communities have come together. We've seen some success with communities like the South and Eastern African Bloc, Southeastern and Central African Bloc, which are taking, and the ECOWAS in the West, which are taking some political as well as economical decisions on and bringing the countries together. So I think these are things that we can celebrate. But I think, generally, we should look at our general direction and realign and work towards a more united Africa, and a more common market with common objectives.
Okay. Let us come to the specific situation in Cameroon, Dr. Aloysius. As Nana Sadu said, the Ambazonians and the separatist groups are celebrating the 1st of October. What is your opinion on that? Should they be celebrating that date? Or, as Nana said, that is not a date for them to celebrate, rather somebody else's date? Is that your opinion?
I think the Ambazonians, if they say they are celebrating the independence of Southern Cameroon. We were all from Southern Cameroon. They believe that now they should rename they should rename Southern Cameroon's Ambazonia. As Dr. Nana said, it's very difficult to see what they are really, what that territory is really, because that territory is not known. It's not, I know that it's all filled in the Wikipedia. They've already filled everything with, when you Google Southern Cameroon, you are seeing Ambazonia. They call it all kinds of names, but we don't know which territory politically they are talking about. So if we say we all have a right to celebrate, I would not deny them celebrating the 1st of October as an Independence Day of the territory, which we call now know as the Southwest and the Northwest regions. But what is there is that what is capital in that is that we, the English-speaking Cameroonians, have the same problem. We cannot, because somebody has decided to solve this problem in a different way, we cannot neglect the problem, because as long as that problem exists, we are never going to be, feel comfortable or taken as Cameroonians in their right, as equitable Cameroonians having the same rights like other Cameroonians and enjoying the same privileges as other Cameroonians. That is the point. That is really the point, that it's like having children in one house. You give them a same treatment, and one of them decides to be a rebel, and the other one, is more docile and hopes that one day things get better. But the problem is still there. Is the problem going to be solved? That is what this is all about. We would never be talking about Ambazonia. We would never be talking about a war in Cameroon. We would never even be talking about. But let's come back to the point. We said this date is Independence Day for Southern Cameroon. Why should it be a taboo? It shouldn't be a taboo in Cameroon. It shouldn't be a taboo, My impression is that the Southern Cameroonians, who were the reason for the unity of Cameroon, are now the suspects of splitting Cameroon, and that has been the kind of narrative that has gone on for the 60 years we have been. It's as if these guys who chose to join us are suspects. They want to separate, and therefore we must treat them in a kind of way as if they are suspects. And therefore, this type of governance of the people of Southern Cameroon has led to, let's say, some indignation, or deep indignation and deep hatred, in many of the, and this we all share. So this we have to emphatically celebrate the 1st of October. Nobody should be hiding the 1st of October from the people of Cameroon. Because you should know that La République du Cameroon had its independence in 1960 at a certain date. The Republic, the Southern Cameroons, had its independence on the 1st of October. And it's on the same 1st of October that we had the reunification. And what brought about the reunification is the fact that the Southern Cameroonians emphatically, in large a landslide, voted to join with La République du Cameroon. It would never have happened if they voted otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You guys have made some very important points. So now let's move and look towards the legacy issue. We've talked about the colonial legacy, and the conflict that we're experiencing today is as a result of that legacy. The decolonization process and what of course the Southern Cameroonians, whether be it the separatists or the federalists or the people that want a decentralized system, they all, agree that the decolonization process, has left a bitter pill in the hearts and minds of some Southern Cameroonians. And so let's look at the practicalities. Now, 3 years down the line, from, some people say 4 years, from August of the late 2016, up until now, we've had a significantly violent, reaction, violent conflict that is ongoing in the two regions. Now, a lot of people argue that, people have been complaining about this marginalization for the past 50 years, These issues have always been there. You've said the same, that these underlying issues have always been there. Now we have a conflict. And this is where I want to speak to Mr. Salinana about your experience in this. Now, what is the state of this conflict? I mean, from where it started in 2016 or 2017, whichever you decide to choose. Now we're in October 2020. I mean, I don't want to talk about winning because, the people that are killed in this war are, whatever context you want to put it, are all Cameroonians. Now, whether you kill separatists or you kill the military, you're still killing each other. So what is your analysis on the state of the war now? Are we any closer to a solution, or are we moving towards, or is the situation deteriorating? And do you think, what do you think can be done, just to be precise?
Right. I wish I knew what could be done, but I think what started in 2016 by the teachers and the lawyers was a question of marginalization and addressing the issues that have been raised over the years, for which I've been a participant in discussing in the 90s. And it's issues of political marginalization, issues of autonomy, and issues of the judicial and educational Anglophone judicial and educational systems. But what started in 2017 with the Ambazonia is not what actually the consortium started. That was now an armed struggle to establish a state called Ambazonia with a different flag, with a different anthem, and in fact, with the borders that they have defined. So I think that we can only measure the Ambazonian armed struggle in various ways. One, by the milestones that they gave themselves, like what they wanted to achieve at different levels. So also by looking at what they say and what they do. So where are we today? If we can look at it from the point of view of what they set themselves out to do in 2017, then there has been a lot of setbacks for them, because they set out to get to Buea at some point. With my trip to Buea and other branding that they did for that, they gave themselves a number of deadlines by which they should at least take Buea or Bamenda and maintain control over that territory. That never happened. And also, they gave themselves other sort of milestones which they set themselves. What they call the Mizam County, for example, had fundraisers and different targets at different times. If we measure them by their targets, then they haven't achieved those targets, and they say so in their live broadcasts. So in their live broadcasts, they often say that we haven't achieved, we set ourselves this, we didn't achieve it. Another major setback for the separatists at the start of the war is the fragmentation of the movement. So in 2017, they had huge sort of public sympathy from the Anglophones. And they also had a leadership that looked like they were united. So the consortium initially, and then the various conclaves that they organized, but that has dissipated into different into different kind of groups and different factions that are very acrimoniously against each other. So it's a setback in terms of their unity of movement. In terms of numbers, the fighters have also reduced considerably, either through killings by the military or defections, or just simply people just simply disappearing. So the numbers are not the same in 2020 as they were in 2017. So all these are setbacks to the Ambazonia side. To the military, there have been lots of setbacks to the military as well.
Hold on. So going back to the Ambazonia, what about control of territory? What is your analysis on that?
In terms of control of territory, they have also, in my judgment, sort of lost a lot of control over the villages and towns that they had control over. In 2017 and 18, in a lot of places, the government officials could not stay in those places. So there were places where the Ambazonia fighters were almost in total control, in the sense that the administrative structures were not there.
Yes, I think we lost.
And judges.
I'm back.
So in my view, lost a lot of control over places that they had more control of. So there's still in the places where, in the Northwest, for example, in places where they are concentrated, like in the area called Noni, in Din area, in areas around, in the cliffs around Din and Jotin and places like that, and in areas in Wasop division, in places like Nkor in Wasop division, these are very dangerous cliffs and very isolated areas where it's very difficult for anybody to get. But before, they were actually in villages and towns. So I think that in terms of territory, they have lost control a lot. Another big setback, in my view, is that they have lost the support of communities. So in 2017 and 2018, they had huge support from the local communities. But because of atrocities and other things that have been committed by Rook separatists, also the allegations of corruption, that sympathy does not exist now as it used to be.
Yeah.
And there are more communities collaborating with the other side. So, but as I said, I mean, there are setbacks on both sides.
Yeah. Before you go to the military, because I want you to talk on the military as well. But I want us to finish with the critical analysis of that from the Ambazonian side. Now, you understand also that the separatist fighters have relied a lot on the diaspora support, and also on fundraising. Do you see that as diminishing, or do you see that as increasing? What about propaganda using online mechanism? What's your take on that?
Again, on both, on the issue of fundraising, that has also virtually dried off, because in 2017 and in 2018, they were raising millions of dollars. Like, for example, on my trip to Buea initiative, they raised more than $2.5 million. And they have been raising money on various initiatives. But in 2020, when they launched the War Draft initiative, in my judgment, they have hardly raised anything on what they said by propaganda that they have. Because a lot of the activists who are on the Ambazonia confess that money is not coming in anymore due to the accusations that they might trip to Buya funds in accounting, and that they're paying for lifestyles of separatist leaders, like their rents and buying them cars in America and in Europe. So in terms of fundraising, that has really kind of like almost dried up. Now, in terms of propaganda, the traffic on social media has actually reduced to an alarming rate. So whereas you would have come up in 2017 and 2018, there were literally hundreds of Ambazonia activists online every day. So they were broadcasting on Facebook and on social media channels on daily basis. But in 2020, the traffic is very, very light. And a lot of the activists sometimes don't come online for many days or even for weeks. And when they come on, the content has also reduced and become less interesting, and the numbers that are following them have reduced from thousands that watch an online show to just like a couple of hundreds. So I think that on the other side, they have actually had serious setbacks. On the funding side, they have also had serious setbacks.
Okay,
and this is according to the Ambazonia activists themselves that come online.
Yeah, let's before I know Colonel Mbaka got lost there a little bit, but
no, I am here, but I don't know why.
That's fine. I'll bring you in. I just wanted Sarinana because I wanted him to give a balanced analysis of the situation. Now, what do you see from the government side? Is the government in control from your analysis, or it's a matter of both sides are losing?
The government cannot be said to be, the military cannot be said to be in control. They have probably improved from the position that they were in 2017 and 2018, but one cannot say that they are in control because, for example, there are still fighters who kill military people, who ambush military people. There are fighters who, for example, today, 1st October, who have been marching, for example, in Lebialem. The fighters have been marching and they have been regrouping in various areas. I mentioned Noni subdivision, for example, and also areas of Mwa where they have been regrouping and the military hasn't been able to get to those places. So the military has been losing. Also, the military had major setbacks, like, for example, the killings of young people in Garbu, for example, by the military, even though a number of those military involved have been arrested. It was a major setback for the Cameroon military and the Cameroon government, both in terms of communication, war propaganda, and also in terms of moral standing. They also has a lot of lapses and cases of indiscipline or rogue soldiers who go off and do stuff that is not probably permitted. They don't have control over them. So one can say the military has learned over the 4 years to manage dissent in a different way. We could see that with the recent protests on the 22nd by the opposition MRC party. Nobody was killed. This is part of the learning that the police and the military have learned from the Anglophone struggle, that, okay, you can't just be shooting at people and killing them. You instead create more, it's a mismanagement of the conflict. So I wouldn't say that the military has won, but they have really made a lot of significant inroads. For example, in Bafut, which has something like 33 villages, Bafut is in the outskirts of Bamenda, has been a stronghold of the armed separatists, especially the Seven Kata. The military has made major inroads into that village, and also in Bali, Yonga, which is also in the outskirts of Bamenda. The military has also made major. There were times that it would have been difficult for military to go there, but they have almost chased the separatists out of those locations, and all the university town of Bambui and Bambili in the outskirts of Bamenda. So you can see places where the military has and where
David,
they are getting collaboration.
Probably we need to conclude because Nana's connection is also losing, and you can see we are having bad internet connection there.
Okay.
So,
yeah. Let me get to. Thank you, Mr. Joseph. Let me just get to Dr. Aloysius. Nana, thank you for that. Dr. Aloysius, I know. Sorry about the connection. Sally Nana has talked about the, giving us a view of the situation with the military and the separatist forces. You know very well that the government has initiated a number of, intimidation measures to address the conflict. One of which, was of course the Grand National Dialogue, which, talked about a special status. We know that the international community, for example, an organization known as the Humanitarian Dialogue from Switzerland, they've been talking about initiating some dialogue, but of course, nothing has really shown up with all this. What do you think is happening, in your opinion, and what should be happening? Because there are two things: what is happening and what should be happening from the government perspective.
I think. Thank you for. I think that what is happening on the ground is that people are not seeing exactly what the changes are. There is a lot of noise made about the grand dialogue and all the definitions and things that probably people don't see what they expect, from the grand dialogue and a lot of things that are going. People are observant of facts, of changes, If you say, for example, we are going to recruit people, and you say you are going to recruit Anglophones, 1,000 Anglophones, and out of that 1,750 are Francophones, then you might have recruited people to a school, but you are not really. This is like playing tricks, So there are lots of things that are not happening. And the government should read the people as well, because the people are looking for a real autonomy. They are saying they are decentralizing, or what they are calling the decentralization. But it's the same, they are using the same tricks, the same kind of thing, putting the same people who have been really, I can say, rejected by the population. It's like choosing the wrong person to represent somebody when they don't want it. So there are lots of things that can happen. Some of the measures that are being taken, that are said to be taken, are not seen at all. In the opposite. For example, you said you want to change. People said they don't want judges who cannot speak English or who don't know the common law. We are having them sent. We're seeing them, redeployed in the same thing. So they are saying one thing and doing something else. I call that a kind of, that people are looking at that as a kind of trickery. That probably they are playing to the international, community, but not addressing the problems. Correcting the problems, and I see, and I may differ a little bit with probably Dr. Noana did not get this. You said, for example, the military operated in the former in the other part or across the Mungo, and there was no death. But on that same day, there were deaths which are suspicious death on the other side, and people just feel we are like, they are the dogs, you know, they can be killed. And if you look at the media, they haven't, of course, you might have missed that because nobody has reported it. In place like Lisoka had 5 people dead, a woman, an old woman. How can she be the terrorist? And if, was she armed? You know, these people who had been displaced from one place to the other, and those things have to be addressed because this is a war. If the state wants to win this war, this is a war of hearts and minds. You have to win the population. If you antagonize the population, then this conflict will go on for much longer than it really should go on. You know, that is, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good way of rounding that point. But let me get a question from Mr. Joseph, and then I can round up the program because I think we're running out of time. Mr. Joseph, go ahead.
Actually, it is not a question. It is a comment from Catherine. 2 comments. I can combine them together. So one is she's saying that Africans are no longer colonized physically, but mentally colonized. And then another one says that Africa should celebrate their independence, but continue to fight for our freedom. This is from Catherine, I think is from the USA. So maybe you might want actually to address those 2 comments.
Yes, I mean, that's a very good point that Catherine is making. I think, you know, we've talked about the independence of Africa from a physical perspective, but also the lack of it from a mental perspective. So I think psychologically, Africans need to move away from that, you know, what some people describe as an inferiority complex, or, you know, always believing that in order for Africa to progress forward, you know, we need to always rely on the Western states. You know, so I think these things are important, and I'm glad that you know, she's mentioning that, and that is why, you know, in terms of you know, of a concluding remark, you know, of this program, we asked the question of, you know, whether in fact Africa should be celebrating independence, and you know, some people believe that yes, we should be celebrating. You know, others believe that it's a point, you know, which Africans should reflect and somehow take a stock of, you know, where we were before, where we are now. What are some of the influences that, you know, African nations need to work on, how to work on those influences, and I think that is the only way that we can, for sure, achieve what we call, you know, sovereignty of our states. And, you know, in order for you to achieve your sovereignty of your state, just like, you know, the experts that we have here today have said, you've got to take into context, you know, all these current dynamics, take into context your historical past, but also use that to map your future engagement. So I really want to appreciate again, my panelist here today, Mr. Salinana, for his always insightful and critical analysis of the situation. I want to thank again Colonel Aloysius Mbaka, somebody who has a very deep understanding of what goes on in the continent, you know, from a civil military perspective, and I really appreciate his views on this matter. Thank you for the to Africans in London Television again for this opportunity. I do really want to apologize to the audience that the connection has been, you know, fairly good. You know, some of my guests, you know, and myself, you know, you couldn't hear or speak. We would continue to improve on the technicalities of the show. Thank you, Mr. Joseph Otieno, again, for hosting the show. And, you know, I think today is a significant day. And in my opinion, in concluding, I think it's a day that Africa needs to reflect. Rather than a day that we should mourn or we should celebrate. But that is the opinion of David Otto, and doesn't represent the opinion of Africans. Thank you, Mr. Joseph.
Okay, and yes, you have rounded up so nicely. As you know, technology is always playing games. We solve one thing, then another thing comes. But I'm always saying that this conversation actually continues on social media. You will find us on YouTube or Facebook. But I must say this, that YouTube is also now, we are in a controlled environment. Let me hope that this video will end up on YouTube because you haven't said anything that violates their rules. As always, we will be back again on Thursday, same time. For now, thank you very much for watching, and please, we encourage you to, we cannot reach everybody, but through social media, you can always mention it to your friends that there is a very great show on African security or on African affairs happening. Until next Thursday, stay tuned.